I closed a $2 billion deal and gave the money bag to my husband for safekeeping overnight, but the next morning, he was gone. The money was gone. And all I had was a note that made my blood freeze. Thanks for everything, Elena. Starting fresh with someone who appreciates me. Good luck rebuilding from nothing. I'm Elena Voss, 68, and I couldn't help but laugh. Because what Marcus didn't know was that the briefcase he stole contained fake bills and a GPS tracker. The real $2 billion. Safe in Swiss accounts for weeks. You see, I didn't build a pharmaceutical empire by trusting people blindly. Not even my husband of 30 years. I built it by staying 3 steps ahead, especially of those who shared my bed. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything, hit that like button. Your pain deserves justice. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Because what I did to my cheating husband will redefine the meaning of revenge. The briefcase wasn't just any security system. It was a test I'd been preparing for months after catching Marcus in lies. At 68, I've learned that people reveal their true nature when enough money is involved. Marcus thought he was married to a successful but trusting pharmaceutical CEO. He had no idea he'd been living with Elena, the Iron Lady Voss, who'd clawed her way to the top by reading people like balance sheets. For 30 years, Marcus had been the perfect, supportive husband, or so I thought. But lately, the lie, late-night phone calls, the deleted messages, the way he looked at our bank statements with hungry eyes. When I announced the $2 billion merger with Titan Pharma, I saw something flicker in his face. Greed. So, I prepared my final marital test, a briefcase that looked identical to the real one, filled with museum-quality replica bills and military-grade GPS tracking. Marcus thought he was stealing from his aging wife. I knew he was walking into the trap that would expose 30 years of lies. Elena Voss stood in her corner office at 68, watching the San Francisco skyline stretch before her like a conquered territory. The $2 billion deal with Titan Pharmaceuticals wasn't just business. It was vindication. 45 years of 18-hour days, missed family dinners, and sacrificed friendships had led to this moment. She'd started with nothing but a chemistry degree and a borrowed lab, building Voss Pharmaceuticals into an empire that had saved millions of lives with breakthrough. Cancer treatments. The negotiations had been brutal, months of hostile takeovers, patent wars and boardroom battles against men half her age who thought she was past her prime. But Elena had outmaneuvered them all, turning their ageism into her advantage, their underestimation into her weapon. When she signed that final contract, watching the Titan executives' faces crumble as they realized they'd been checkmated by a retired woman, Elena felt invincible. Her team erupted in celebration, champagne flowing like liquid victory. But the real satisfaction came from Marcus, standing in the corner, his warm eyes reflecting her triumph. Or so she thought. "You did it, Elle," he whispered, pulling her close as the lawyers packed their documents. "We're set for life now." Elena laughed, drunk on success and champagne. The client had insisted on a symbolic handoff, a briefcase representing the magnitude of the deal. "It's just for show," she'd explained to Marcus. "The real money transfers through secure banking channels." But as Elena prepared to leave that evening, something nagged at her business instincts. Marcus had been different lately, asking pointed questions about her succession plans, showing unusual interest in their joint accounts, taking calls in other rooms with hushed voices that stopped when she entered. Marcus Williams had been playing a longer game than Elena realized. During their 30-year marriage, she'd seen him as the devoted husband who'd supported her, rise from struggling entrepreneur to pharmaceutical mogul. What she didn't see were the mounting gambling debts from his business trips to Atlantic City, the secret credit cards maxed out on cryptocurrency speculation, the loans taken against their house without her knowledge. Marcus had mastered the art of financial deception, using Elena's busy schedule and trust to hide a lifestyle of increasingly desperate bets. He'd convinced himself he was one big win away from solving everything, that Elena would never notice the missing money if he could just hit the jackpot. But 45 years of losses had taught the house one thing: Marcus Williams was a mark, not a player. When the loan sharks started circling, offering him a simple solution, access to Elena's accounts in exchange for erasing his debts, Marcus saw it as divine intervention. Cassandra, his addiction counselor turned secret lover, had been patient, understanding, ready to start fresh somewhere Elena's reach couldn't. Touch them. She'll never even notice, Cassandra had whispered during their clandestine meetings. You've supported her career for decades. You've earned this. Marcus had almost convinced himself that taking Elena's money wasn't theft. It was collecting 30 years of unpaid salary for being the supportive husband while she built her empire. But what Marcus didn't understand was that Elena hadn't survived in the pharmaceutical industry by being naive about money or people. She'd been watching, calculating, preparing for the day when someone close to her would try to exploit her success. That day had finally come, and Elena was ready to teach Marcus why they called her the Iron Lady in boardrooms across 3 continents. And that's when he began to disappear. Elena noticed the changes immediately after announcing the Titan deal. Marcus became hyper-attentive to her schedule, asking detailed questions about the money transfer process, volunteering to handle security arrangements with an eagerness that felt performative. But Elena's pharmaceutical background had trained her to recognize patterns, anomalies, and warning signs that others missed. She'd built her career identifying problems before they became catastrophic, and Marcus was exhibiting all the classic symptoms of someone planning something desperate. That evening, Elena performed her final test. She opened the briefcase in front of Marcus, showing him neat stacks of what appeared to be $100 bills, $2 billion in negotiable bonds, she said, watching his pupils dilate with greed that he tried to mask as concern. The Titan executives insisted on this dramatic handoff for their shareholders. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he touched the money. It's incredible, Elle. Everything we dreamed of. But Elena was watching more than his reaction. She was watching the micro-expressions that 40 years of pharmaceutical negotiations had taught her to read. The slight tightening around his eyes that meant deception, the unconscious lip-licking that indicated predatory calculation, the way his fingers lingered on the briefcase handle like he was already claiming ownership. "Keep it safe tonight," Elena whispered, kissing Marcus goodnight with lips that tasted like the bitter medicine she was about to administer. She'd learned long ago that the people closest to you had the most access to destroy you, which was why she'd never stopped being Elena, Iron Lady. Voss, the pharmaceutical executive who trusted laboratory results over promises. As she lay in bed pretending to sleep, Elena listened to Marcus moving around the house, probably planning his escape route and dreaming of his new life with Cassandra. By morning, he would learn that stealing from Elena Voss wasn't just betrayal, it was career suicide. Nobody could see him anymore, but he still moved through the rooms. Elena discovered this truth when she woke at 6 a.m. to find Marcus gone. The briefcase missing, and a note that revealed 30 years of hidden resentment. "Thanks for everything, Elena. Starting fresh with someone who appreciates me for more than a supporting role. Good luck rebuilding from nothing. M and C." The inclusion of C told Elena everything about Cassandra, the addiction counselor who'd been treating Marcus's gambling problem while apparently creating a bigger one. Elena sat in their empty kitchen, reading the note twice before she started laughing. A deep, uncontrollable laugh that echoed through the house because Marcus had just stolen worthless paper and signed his own arrest warrant. She opened her laptop, pulled up the tracking software, and watched the blinking dot move south toward Monterey. 75 Lipresm, heading to the beach house she'd bought Marcus for their 25th anniversary. The one he thought she'd forgotten about. Elena's home security system had been recording everything. Marcus sneaking out at 3:17 a.m., Cassandra waiting in a rented Toyota, the two of them kissing before loading the briefcase like amateur bank robbers in a B-movie. Because while Marcus had been planning his midlife crisis heist, Elena had been building the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation in pharmaceutical industry history. The briefcase contained museum-quality replica currency, legal to possess, worthless to spend, and equipped with enough surveillance technology to track them to the moon. But the real trap wasn't the fake money. It was the paper trail Elena had been constructing for months. Every gambling debt, every secret meeting with Cassandra, every lie Marcus had told had been documented by private investigators who specialized in corporate espionage. Marcus thought he was leaving his wife for his mistress. Elena knew he was walking into a federal conspiracy case that would destroy both their lives in ways their small minds couldn't imagine. There was a memory that Elena kept as a secret treasure, the most precious proof. That her marriage had been real, even if Marcus wasn't. It was their 25th anniversary, and they'd driven to their beach house in Monterey for a weekend that felt stolen from time itself. Elena had been exhausted from a particularly brutal FDA approval process, working 20-hour days to get a new cancer drug to market. Marcus had watched her deteriorating health with patient concern until finally packing her bags himself. The pharmaceutical world can survive without Elena Voss for 48 hours, he'd said, confiscating her phone and laptop, but I can't survive watching you work yourself to death. They'd spent the weekend walking on the beach, talking about dreams beyond Voss Pharmaceuticals, about the children they'd never had time for, about growing old together in a world where Elena wasn't constantly fighting for market share. Marcus had shared his fears about being overshadowed by her success, how he sometimes felt like an accessory to her achievements rather than a partner in them. Elena had confessed her terror of aging out of relevance, the constant anxiety that one failed drug trial would expose her as yesterday's news. They'd made love slowly, deliberately, as if they had all the time in the world, instead of just a stolen weekend. On Sunday morning, Marcus had made her favorite breakfast, French toast with strawberries, while Elena sat on the deck in his oversized Stanford sweatshirt, watching seagulls dive for fish in the churning Pacific. I want this forever, she'd said, meaning not just the breakfast or the sex, but the feeling of being known and chosen by someone who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Marcus had turned from the stove, his eyes bright with what she'd interpreted as devotion, but now recognized as guilt. Forever, he'd repeated, but his voice carried the weight of someone already planning his exit strategy. That weekend had been the last time Elena felt completely safe in love, the last time she'd believed that 30 years of marriage meant something more than convenient cover for whatever Marcus was really planning. The call came at 9:47 a.m., just as Elena was finishing her coffee and watching Marcus's location ping from their Monterey beach house where he thought he was safely hidden. Elena? The voice was barely controlled panic mixed with righteous indignation. What the hell is this? Good morning, Marcus, Elena replied cheerfully, as if he hadn't just stolen from her and abandoned their marriage for his addiction counselor. Enjoying your romantic getaway? She could hear Cassandra crying in the background, probably surrounded by worthless fake bills that looked perfect but would never fund their fantasy of easy retirement. You gave me counterfeit money, Marcus hissed, his voice cracking with the realization that he'd been outplayed. No, darling, You stole counterfeit money. There's a significant legal and moral difference. Elena refreshed her tracking app, confirming their location with GPS precision that would make the military jealous. You planned this entire thing. The hurt in his voice was almost convincing, as if he was the victim in this scenario. I've been planning for this since our 20th anniversary when I first caught you gambling, Elena said calmly. See, unlike you, I actually pay attention to the person I'm sleeping with. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the missing money, the secret phone calls, or the addiction counselor you've been sleeping with for 8 months? The silence stretched so long, Elena wondered if he'd had a heart attack. Finally, I needed that money, Elle. I'm in debt to people who will kill me if I don't pay them back. Then you should have asked your wife for help, instead of trying to rob her blind, Elena replied, her voice taking on the icy tone that had made pharmaceutical executives wet themselves during negotiations. But here's the thing, Marcus. I'm not your victim. You're mine. She let that sink. Before delivering the killing blow, the FBI should be knocking on your door any moment now. I filed theft and conspiracy charges an hour ago, complete with video evidence and your exact coordinates. Hope Cassandra looks good in federal orange. The city didn't prohibit the old, it just pretended they weren't there anymore. Elena understood this as she realized that Marcus's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was him buying into society's narrative that women over 65 were used up, forgotten, easily exploited, but Marcus had fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. Elena wasn't some doddering pharmaceutical heiress ready to be fleeced by her younger husband and his mistress. She was Elena Iron Lady Voss, who'd spent 45 years outmaneuvering men who thought her age made her vulnerable. The arrest photos arrived via her attorney's encrypted email. Marcus face down on the hood of a police car, hands zip-tied behind his back, while Cassandra screamed in the driveway. Of their beach house love nest, wearing nothing but a bathrobe and handcuffs. Along with the photos came a simple question from her lawyer. Press for maximum federal sentences or accept plea bargains? Elena stared at the images for a long moment, remembering the man who'd made her French toast and promised forever. Then she typed back, maximum sentences, public records, no sealed files. Because Marcus had made the fatal error of underestimating the most important thing about Elena Voss. She'd never been just a pharmaceutical CEO. She was a woman who'd built an empire by recognizing threats before they materialized, who'd survived in a male-dominated industry by being more ruthless than any man dared to be. The naive wife Marcus thought he'd been married to had never existed. Elena had been playing chess while he was playing checkers, building surveillance networks that would make intelligence agencies jealous. Every gambling debt he'd hidden, every lie he'd told, every secret. Meeting with Cassandra had been documented and archived with the thoroughness of a pharmaceutical trial. Marcus thought he was stealing $2 billion from his aging wife. Elena knew he was walking into a federal conspiracy case that would destroy not just his freedom, but serve as a warning to anyone who thought Elena Voss was too old to fight back. Being old here wasn't a crime, it was punishment. Elena discovered this truth as she watched the aftermath of Marcus's arrest unfold like a perfectly orchestrated clinical trial with predictable results. The moment the booking photos hit pharmaceutical industry newsletters, Marcus's world began disintegrating with scientific precision. His consulting position at 3 biotech firms terminated within hours, his board seats at 2 medical foundations rescinded by emergency vote, his professional reputation built over 30 years reduced to a cautionary tale about white-collar crime. But the real devastation came from their social circle. Elena hadn't contacted anyone, she didn't need to. The pharmaceutical community was smaller than people realized, and scandal traveled faster than FDA approvals. Former colleagues sent Elena carefully worded messages of support, each one essentially saying, "We always knew Marcus was riding your coattails." The country club where Marcus played golf 3 times a week quietly revoked his membership. The charity boards where he'd leveraged Elena's connections suddenly discovered conflicts of interest that required his immediate resignation. Meanwhile, Elena used Marcus's betrayal to cement her legacy in ways she'd never imagined. She announced the creation of the Voss Foundation for Senior Women Entrepreneurs, using the attempted theft as proof that society needed to stop underestimating older women. Forbes called her the pharmaceutical phoenix for turning personal betrayal into professional triumph. Harvard Business School invited her to speak about strategic planning for life after betrayal. But Elena's masterpiece was the pharmaceutical industry conference, where she delivered a keynote titled, "What 30 Years of Marriage Taught Me About Risk Assessment." She never mentioned Marcus by name, but everyone in the audience understood the subtext. Even the people closest to you need to be treated as potential threats to your empire. Marcus had wanted to steal her money and disappear into comfortable anonymity. Instead, he'd made Elena Voss the most celebrated example of why you should never underestimate a woman who'd spent 45 years proving that age was just another variable to control. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to be called by his name. But Marcus had forfeited the right to his identity the moment he'd chosen theft over honesty, betrayal over partnership. Elena visited him once in federal detention, not out of nostalgia, but to deliver a message that would define the rest of his significantly shortened life. "Marcus," she said, watching him flinch at the coldness in her voice as he sat across from her in orange jumpsuit and shackles, "look at me." When he raised his eyes, Elena saw not the husband she'd loved, but a stranger wearing his face, aged 10 years in 10 weeks. "Did you ever love me? Or was I just a convenient ATM for your gambling addiction?" His answer came in broken whispers. "I loved you so much it terrified me every day, knowing I was living off your success. Everything I did was to try to feel like I deserved you." But Elena heard what he wasn't saying, that he'd made the choice to deserve her by stealing from her, that he'd decided her feelings mattered less than his wounded pride, that he'd chosen to destroy their marriage rather than admit he needed help. "You don't get to rewrite history now," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just spent 30 years supporting a man who'd been planning to rob her. "You don't get to turn theft into romance or betrayal into sacrifice. You stole from me because you're weak, not because you loved me." Marcus's federal defender had tried to broker a plea deal, emphasizing his previously clean record and the non-violent nature of his crimes. Elena had listened to the man's arguments with the patience of someone evaluating clinical trial data, then delivered her verdict. "Mr. Marcus Williams will serve every day of his sentence as a reminder that stealing from Elena Voss carries consequences that extend far beyond federal prison." She signed the impact statement requesting maximum sentences, stood up and looked Marcus in the eye one final time. "Enjoy learning what starting from scratch actually means," she said, echoing his own cruel words with compound interest. In the city of faded mirrors, she knew she would be the next to disappear. Elena understood that Marcus's betrayal had been based on a fundamental miscalculation about what happened to successful women after 65. He'd assumed that age had made her soft, trusting, ready to be managed by someone who understood her vulnerabilities. Instead, Elena used his betrayal to demonstrate that she was more dangerous at 68 than she'd ever been at 40. Her revenge was surgical in its precision and devastating in its scope. She'd spent months building a digital dossier on Marcus that would follow him for the rest of his life. Every background check, every credit application, every potential employer would see the same story. A man who'd stolen from his wife after 30 years of marriage. But Elena's masterpiece was how she'd handled Cassandra. The addiction counselor who'd thought she was stealing a pharmaceutical heiress's husband learned too late that she'd actually destroyed her own professional life. Elena had traced Cassandra's credentials, discovered falsified therapy records, and anonymously reported her to the state licensing board. One investigation revealed that Cassandra had been sleeping with multiple patients, using her position to identify vulnerable marks for financial exploitation. Within 6 months, Cassandra lost her license, her practice, her apartment, and her freedom when additional charges revealed a pattern of insurance fraud stretching back years. Elena never spoke to Cassandra directly. She didn't need to. The system Elena had built destroyed her systematically, legally, and permanently. The woman who'd thought she was trading up from being a counselor to being a pharmaceutical heiress's widow ended up serving 18 months for conspiracy and professional misconduct. Elena watched it all unfold from her executive suite, feeling not satisfaction, but the cold efficiency of a pharmaceutical CEO who'd eliminated threats to market stability. Marcus and Cassandra had tried to exploit what they saw as an aging woman's vulnerability. Instead, they'd provided Elena with the perfect demonstration of why experience trumps youth, why preparation beats desperation, and why you should never underestimate someone who'd spent 45 years turning problems into profitable solutions. The silence of the house had its own texture. Elena discovered this during the weeks after Marcus's arrest, when she returned to their home and found herself alone with the echoes of a 30-year marriage that had apparently been built on financial convenience rather than genuine partnership. Every room told stories that were only half true. Every photograph captured moments where only one person had been authentic. But Elena realized that silence was also liberation. The quiet of no longer having to pretend that her marriage was based on mutual respect rather than Marcus's dependence on her success. She used those quiet weeks to systematically reconstruct her life with the same precision she'd used to build Voss Pharmaceuticals. Marcus's belongings went to charity, expensive suits purchased with money he'd skimmed from their accounts, golf clubs bought with funds meant for their retirement, books about gambling systems that explained where their joint savings had really gone. But the most important work Elena did was internal. She'd spent 30 years accommodating Marcus's ego, moderating her success to make him feel relevant, crediting him publicly for achievements that were entirely her own. Now, she had to remember who Elena Voss was when she wasn't performing supportive wife for someone who'd been planning to rob her. The woman who emerged from that process was sharper, more focused, less willing to apologize for her intelligence or soften her edges to make men comfortable. Elena expanded Voss Pharmaceuticals into 3 new research areas, hired a security team that would have impressed federal agencies, and built protocols around her personal life that treated every relationship as a potential threat to be managed. She started dating again, carefully, strategically, with background checks that revealed Marcus's lies would have been exposed within days rather than decades. Every potential partner underwent financial scrutiny that would have prevented the gambling debts, psychological evaluation that would have identified the narcissistic tendencies, and verification of professional credentials that would have revealed the addiction to risk-taking disguised as business acumen. Elena never again made the mistake of thinking that loving someone meant trusting them with unlimited access to her life. She was still waiting for an apology. It didn't even need to be elaborate, just acknowledgement that Marcus had violated every principle of partnership, trust and respect that 30 years of marriage was supposed to represent. But Elena realized that Marcus couldn't apologize for something he still didn't consider a crime. Even from federal prison, his letters were full of justifications. He'd been desperate. He'd been emasculated by her success. He'd been trying to finally contribute something meaningful to their relationship. Marcus saw himself as a tragic victim of circumstance rather than a calculating thief who'd spent years planning to exploit his wife's trust. This fundamental disconnect, his belief that feeling inadequate justified theft, that wounded pride excused betrayal, meant that Elena was grieving not just their marriage, but the possibility that Marcus could ever understand why his choices had been unforgivable. The final letter came 8 months after his sentencing. Marcus had been given 5 years for federal theft, conspiracy, and money laundering charges. His handwriting was different, smaller, more careful, as he wrote about prison, about Cassandra, who'd stopped taking his calls after her own conviction, about the life he'd destroyed for money that wasn't even real. "I know you'll never forgive me," he wrote, "but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love you without feeling like I was disappearing." Elena read the letter once, then fed it into her industrial document shredder, along with every other piece of their shared history. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, not because the crime was unforgivable, but because forgiveness would require Elena to become someone she could no longer afford to be, someone who trusted people who confused love with ownership, someone who accepted that men's fragile egos justified destroying women's empires. Marcus had wanted to prove he was worthy of her success by stealing it. Instead, he'd taught Elena the most valuable lesson of her 70 years, that the people who claim to love you the most are often the ones planning to hurt you the worst, and the only protection is being strong enough to survive without them. Elena Voss still lives in the pharmaceutical empire she built over 45 years, still wakes up every morning in the bed where Marcus planned his betrayal, still sees his ghost in the coffee maker he used to program for her early laboratory meetings. But Elena has learned something that Marcus never understood, that you can survive having your heart broken by someone you trusted with everything, and emerge not just stronger, but more powerful than you ever imagined possible. The $2 billion deal not only went through, but opened doors Marcus's small mind could never have conceived. Elena's handling of his betrayal became legendary in pharmaceutical circles. The woman who'd turned personal catastrophe into professional vindication, who'd outmaneuvered her own husband with the same strategic brilliance she brought to FDA negotiations. Voss Pharmaceuticals expanded globally, with Elena's story of resilience inspiring a new generation of women entrepreneurs who refused to be sidelined by age or circumstance. Marcus served his 5-year sentence in federal prison, becoming a cautionary tale about the cost of underestimating women who'd built empires by staying ahead of every threat. Cassandra disappeared into the criminal justice system, her dreams of easy money replaced by the reality of professional disgrace and federal conviction. Their love story ended in orange jumpsuits and public humiliation, exactly as Elena had orchestrated from the moment she'd prepared that fake briefcase. Elena never remarried, but she never stopped building. She created research foundations, funded scholarships for women in science, and became the mentor she'd needed when she was young and trusting enough to believe that love meant sharing everything with someone who might use it against you. The briefcase that had started everything sits in Elena's office now, empty but polished. A reminder that empires can be threatened, but they can also be defended by women smart enough to prepare for betrayal. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up proving how indestructible you really are. Marcus thought he was stealing $2 billion from his aging wife. Instead, he gave Elena Voss the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was strong, Enough to survive anything, even the betrayal of someone she'd loved for 30 years. If you know someone who confused marriage with ownership, desperation with justification, write their name in the comments, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. This isn't just a video. It's proof that the people who underestimate you because of your age often end up regretting it for the rest of their significantly shortened lives.